The sun had barely risen over the horizon when Jack Miller was already on his feet, feeling the morning dew soak his worn boots as he walked through the fields of his family's modest farm in Clear Creek, a small town in the heart of Indiana. At 25, his calloused hands carried not only the tools of rural labor, but also dreams far bigger than the boundaries of that property. "Jack, don't tell me you spent the whole night going over those irrigation plans again," asked Beth. Miller, his mother, placing a mug of strong coffee on the rustic kitchen table as he finally came in for breakfast. "I had to finish the calculations, Mom. This system could triple our soybean yield next harvest," he replied, flashing a smile that revealed the determination he'd inherited from his father. George Miller, who had just walked in through the back door after checking on the cattle, shook his head with a mix of pride and concern. "Son, I admire your persistence, but we're just a family of settlers who came to this country 2 generations ago. We don't have the capital to compete with the big landowners around here." Jack downed his coffee in one gulp and looked at his father intently. "That's exactly what I'm going to change, Dad. I don't just want to survive as a farmer. I want to turn this land into the biggest agricultural enterprise in Indiana." Jack's friends, all sons of local farmers, had already left for Chicago or Indianapolis in search of opportunities far from agriculture. Charlie Thompson was studying law, Michael Rodriguez was working at a multinational corporation, and even his best friend, Brian Adams, had left his parents' farm to try his luck as an engineer in the city. "A farmer will never be more than that," Brian had said before leaving, with that hint of pity in his voice that Jack hated. That afternoon, as Jack tinkered with the family's old tractor, an elegant envelope arrived in the mail. It was an invitation to the annual gala hosted by Richard Thompson, owner of the largest grain processing company in the region and Charlie's father. The event would bring together the most important names in American agribusiness, and somehow, perhaps out of consideration for his son, Richard had included the Miller family on the guest list. "This is your chance to make important connections," said Beth, excited at the prospect of seeing her son in an environment that could open doors for his dreams. On the night of the event, Jack drove the family's old pickup truck to the Thompsons' imposing mansion, perched on a hill overlooking the town. The contrast between his simple suit, bought for his high school graduation 5 years earlier, and the elegant attire of the other guests was striking, but he held his head high. It was during a moment when he was watching the businessmen discuss deals on the terrace that Jack saw her for the first time. Emily Thompson floated across the room, her sky blue dress perfectly matching her eyes and her golden hair tied up in an elegant bun. Richard Thompson's daughter was known in the region not only for her beauty, but also for her sharp intellect. She had graduated in business administration from a prestigious university and had recently returned to take a position at her father's company. "You look lost," she said, approaching with a gentle smile and extending her hand. "Emily Thompson." "Jack Miller," he replied, feeling an inexplicable warmth rise up his neck. "And yes, I'm a little out of my element here." The conversation flowed with surprising ease. Emily was fascinated by Jack's knowledge of sustainable agriculture and his innovative ideas for turning small farms into profitable ventures. For nearly an hour, they forgot about the world around them, until the deep voice of Richard Thompson interrupted the spell. "Emily, darling, the ambassador would like to meet you," he said, casting a scrutinizing look at Jack. "And you are?" "Jack Miller, sir. My family owns a farm east of town." Richard's cordial smile turned into one of thinly veiled disdain. "Ah, of course, the Millers. The small property bordering the nature reserve," he remarked with a tone that made the word small sound like an insult. "I assume you're here as a guest of one of our business partners?" "Actually, we received an invitation," Jack replied, maintaining his dignity despite the growing embarrassment. Richard raised his eyebrows in surprise, then turned to a group of approaching businessmen. "Gentlemen, do you know young Miller? He believes he can turn his, 50 acres, into an agricultural empire," he announced with a laugh that was soon echoed by the others. Jack's face burned with humiliation as he saw Emily lower her eyes, clearly embarrassed by her father's behavior. Perhaps the young farmer can serve us more champagne since he's among us tonight, added one of the businessmen, prompting more laughter. Richard placed a hand on Jack's shoulder with false cordiality. No offense, son, but there's a natural order to things. Men like us build empires, while men like you, well, you're essential for the basic work of the land, understand? Before Jack could respond, he felt the firm hand of a security guard on his arm. Sir, I believe there's been a mistake with your invitation. Please come with me. The guest's stares burned into his back as he was escorted out of the mansion like an unwanted intruder. The last image he saw was Emily trying to follow him, only to be stopped by her father's firm grip. Back on the road, driving home to the farm with his knuckles white from gripping the steering wheel, Jack felt something crystallize within him. It wasn't just anger or humiliation. It was absolute resolve. They'll see what a simple farmer can do, he muttered to himself, as the truck's headlights cut through the darkness of the rural night, illuminating a path he now saw with crystal clarity. The next 3 years passed in a whirlwind for Jack Miller. The humiliation at the Thompsons' mansion had become the fuel that powered his long days, starting well before dawn and ending long after the stars had filled the Indiana sky. The first big leap came when Jack secured a small loan from the local bank to implement his innovative irrigation system. The manager, Nathan Brooks, an old friend of his father's, took a chance on him when no one else would. I've never seen someone with so much determination in their eyes, Nathan remarked, signing the papers. But remember, Jack, you're risking everything your family has built. The first harvest with the new system surprised even the most experienced farmers in the region. The Millers tripled their soybean yield using less water and resources than traditional methods. We need to patent this system, insisted George, finally convinced by the undeniable success. This isn't just an improvement, it's a revolution. Jack didn't waste any time. While patenting his irrigation system, he traveled to Chicago to attend an international agribusiness fair. It was there that he met Ryan Cooper, an American businessman looking to invest in sustainable agricultural technologies. What you've developed on your farm is exactly what farmers around the world are looking for, Ryan said, after visiting the Millers' property. I'm willing to fund a significant expansion, but I want a 30% stake in future ventures. The partnership with Cooper Investments transformed the Millers' modest farm into a hub for agricultural technology development. Within 18 months, they had acquired neighboring properties, expanding to over 2,000 acres. The Miller system, as it became known, began to be implemented on farms across the US, then in Argentina, and soon reached Europe. Jack, now CEO of Miller Agritech, became a respected name in the international agribusiness circuit. His photo appeared on the cover of Agribusiness Today under the headline, "The Revolutionary Farmer." The article described him as the young visionary redefining the standards of modern agriculture. On a particularly hot January afternoon, as Jack reviewed plans for his latest project, a soil analysis system powered by artificial intelligence, his assistant, Kevin Martinez, hurried into the office. Jack, we've just received some important news, Kevin said, placing a tablet on the desk. Thompson Processing is on the verge of bankruptcy. Their stock has dropped 78% since the beginning of the year, and rumors are that Richard Thompson is desperately seeking buyers. Jack stared at the screen, where the plummeting stock graph of Richard's company contrasted sharply with the meteoric rise of Miller Agritech. A wave of satisfaction washed over him, quickly replaced by something more complex. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about proving that his vision had been right all along. What happened to them? He asked, keeping his tone neutral. Kevin swiped the screen, revealing more information. Apparently, Thompson heavily invested in traditional processing methods, ignoring market changes. When producers started migrating to systems like ours, which offer greater efficiency and sustainability, they fell behind. The final blow was losing their European market contract for failing to meet new environmental standards. That night, alone in his new home, an elegant property on the outskirts of town but still overlooking the fields he loved, Jack reflected on how far he'd come. He thought of Emily Thompson, whom he hadn't seen since that fateful night at the mansion. He'd heard from acquaintances that she had publicly disagreed with her father's management decisions, advocating for the very innovations Jack was implementing. According to rumors, it had caused a rift in the family. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. The number was unfamiliar, but something made him answer. Jack Miller speaking. A brief silence on the other end, and then a voice he could never forget. "Jack, it's Emily Thompson." Jack's heart raced, but he kept his voice steady. "Emily, what a surprise. I imagine you've already heard about our company's situation," she said, her voice tense. "My father, he's quite shaken. Things spiraled out of control so quickly." "I'm sorry to hear about the tough situation," Jack replied genuinely. As much as Richard had humiliated him, he didn't wish to see a century-old company collapse, affecting hundreds of jobs in the region. "He'd like to meet with you," Emily continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "I believe it's difficult for him, but the situation is desperate, and your name is the only one on the list of potential investors who could truly understand the value of what we've built, despite recent mistakes." Jack felt the weight of the irony in the situation. The man who had thrown him out of his home like an intruder was now seeking his help. "When would he like to meet?" Jack asked, keeping his tone professional. "Tomorrow, if possible. At the Thompson headquarters. We'd prefer discretion. The press is already speculating enough about our situation." After hanging up, Jack remained still for a few minutes, gazing through the window at the fields stretching under the starry Indiana sky. The same land Richard Thompson had once deemed insignificant was now the heart of an empire that could either save or let the Thompson business sink. The next day, Jack arrived at the imposing Thompson Processing Building promptly at 10. The receptionist, who clearly recognized him, escorted him directly to the president's office without announcement. Richard Thompson had aged dramatically. The once imposing man seemed smaller, his shoulders slightly hunched and deep lines of worry etched into his face. Beside him, Emily stood tall, but her eyes revealed many sleepless nights. "Mr. Miller," Richard said, rising to extend his hand. The formal title didn't escape Jack. No longer young Miller or the farmer. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "Mr. Thompson," Jack replied, shaking his hand firmly. "Emily mentioned the situation is urgent." Richard gestured to a chair, and the three sat down. For an uncomfortable moment, silence filled the room. It was Richard who finally broke it, his voice carrying the weight of every wrong decision he'd made in recent years. "I suppose irony is the appropriate word for this situation," he began with a sad smile. "A few years ago I dismissed your dreams and capabilities at that event in my home. Today I'm essentially begging for your vision and expertise to save my family's legacy." Jack kept his expression neutral, glancing at Emily from the corner. Of his eye, she was watching him with unmistakable intensity. "Let's get to the facts then," Jack said, opening his briefcase. "I've reviewed your public financial reports. The situation is dire but not irreversible." Emily leaned forward slightly. "Would you consider an investment?" "I'm considering more than that," Jack replied, looking directly at Richard. "I'm considering a full merger. Thompson has infrastructure and international presence that would be valuable for my expansion, while Miller Agritech has the technology and modern management you need to survive." Richard's face paled. "A merger? That would mean—" "It would mean new management," Jack finished without hesitation. "Thompson Processing would become part of the Miller Group under my direct leadership. You'd retain a position on the board, but strategic decisions would be mine." The silence that followed was thick with tension. Richard opened his mouth to respond, but Emily spoke first. "It's a fair proposal, Dad. In fact, it's generous, given our current state." Richard stared at Jack for long seconds, then at his daughter, and finally looked down at the documents on the table. "The empire my father built, under another family's name." "It's not about names, Mr. Thompson," Jack said firmly. "It's about vision. Your father was a pioneer in his time, but the world has changed. This merger wouldn't erase your legacy. It would transform it to survive in the future. As sounds, Richard pondered. Jack noticed a subtle shift in Emily's expression. There was admiration there, mixed with something deeper, perhaps a glimpse of the connection they'd shared years ago, before the world and circumstances pulled them apart. "I need time to think," Richard said finally. "How long do we have?" "Before this offer expires." 48 hours, Jack replied, standing up. "That's how long I can hold off my investors, who'd prefer to simply wait for Thompson to collapse and acquire the assets for a fraction of the value." As he left the room, Jack felt the light touch of Emily's hand on his arm. "Can I speak with you privately for a moment?" she asked, guiding him to a small, empty meeting room. When the door closed, Emily sighed deeply. "I know I have no right to ask for anything, but there are 400 employees who depend on this. Company, entire families. I'm not doing this for revenge, Emily," Jack replied, softening his tone for the first time. "It's a business decision. The merger would save those jobs." Emily took a step closer. "And us? What happened that night? I never had the chance to say how sorry I was for my father's behavior." Jack felt the old warmth return, but there was more at stake now than personal feelings. "A lot has changed since then. We've both changed." "Some things don't change," she insisted, her blue eyes locked on his. "Some connections are too rare to ignore, even after years apart." Before Jack could respond, his phone buzzed. It was Kevin, with urgent updates on his new international project. The moment was broken. "I need to go," he said, stepping back. "You have my offer. I'll await your father's response within the next 48 hours. As he left the Thompson building, Jack felt the weight of the decisions ahead. It wasn't just about business or proving his worth. It was about defining the kind of man he had become on this journey of overcoming and success. The Miller Agritech boardroom was utterly silent as Richard Thompson signed the final document of the merger agreement. The 48 hours had stretched into a week of intense negotiations, but the outcome remained essentially the same. Thompson Processing was now part of the Miller Group, under Jack's direct leadership. "It's done," Richard said, handing the golden pen back to the attending lawyer. His eyes revealed a mix of defeat and relief. "Take care of what we built, Miller." Jack extended his hand across the table. "You'll remain as a senior advisor, Richard. Your experience will be valuable during the transition." The handshake that sealed the merger was brief but significant. 4 years earlier, one of them had been humiliated and thrown out like he didn't belong in the same room as the other. Now the dynamic had completely reversed. As the lawyers and executives left the room, Jack remained seated, absorbing the magnitude of the moment. His secretary, Melissa Wilson, entered discreetly. "The press release is ready to go," she informed him, "and your parents have arrived for the celebration dinner." "Thank you, Melissa. I'll be there in a few minutes." Alone, Jack opened his laptop and looked at the photo of the old family farm, now transformed into a modern agricultural research and development center. His parents, though they had moved to a comfortable house in town, still visited daily, with George personally, overseeing experimental projects. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Emily Thompson entered, wearing a sleek navy blue executive suit that accentuated the intensity of her eyes. "Not joining the celebrations?" she asked, approaching. "Just reflecting," Jack replied, closing the laptop. "It's a big step." Emily sat in the chair beside him, no longer as the daughter of the former owner, but as the new director of international relations for the Miller Group, a position Jack had insisted on keeping for her, recognizing her exceptional talent. "I still can't believe my father accepted your terms," she remarked with a slight smile. "The Jack Miller I met at that party would be shocked to see this." "That Jack still had a lot to learn," he replied, returning the smile. "About business and about people." "And what exactly did he learn?" Jack leaned slightly forward. "That building is more important than tearing down. I could have waited for Thompson to collapse completely, bought the assets for a fraction of the value. It would have been a masterstroke financially and perfect revenge. But you didn't. No, because I realized it wasn't just about proving your father wrong about me. It was about proving I was right about the potential of American agriculture, about sustainable innovation, about building something that would outlast my own ego. Emily's gaze softened. My father would never admit it, but he respects you now, not just for your success, but for how you achieved it. Jack nodded, acknowledging the weight of her words. The two sat in silence for a moment until Emily spoke again, her voice quieter, almost hesitant. That day when we met again at the Thompson office, you didn't respond when I mentioned our connection. Jack took a deep breath. The past weeks had been a whirlwind of meetings, strategic decisions, and planning for the future of the new conglomerate. There had been no time to think about personal relationships. It was a complicated moment, he finally replied. There was too much at stake. And now, Emily pressed, her voice steady, but her eyes searching his for answers. There's still a lot at stake, but it's different now. We're working together, building something new together. Jack hesitated, the weight of the past few years pressing on him. He had built an empire, proven his worth, and yet this connection with Emily, was something he hadn't allowed himself to fully confront. The walls he had built around his heart, the focus he had poured into his work, all of it seemed to tremble under the intensity of her gaze. Emily, he began, his voice low but firm, when we first met at that gala, I felt something I hadn't felt before. But after that night I convinced myself that people like us belonged to different worlds. I told myself I had to focus on my goals, on proving everyone wrong. And you did, Emily said softly, taking a step closer. You've done more than anyone thought possible. But Jack, those worlds you thought were so different, they've merged. Literally, our companies, our lives, they're intertwined now. And I can't ignore what I feel, not anymore. Jack's breath caught as she reached out, her fingers brushing against his hand. The touch was light, but it sent a current through him, breaking down the barriers he had so carefully constructed. I've spent years building this company, this legacy, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I told myself I didn't have room for anything else. But you've always been there, in the back of my mind, even when I tried to push you away. Emily's eyes softened and she took another step closer, closing the distance between them. Then stop pushing me away, Jack. We've both changed, grown, but some things, some connections, are too strong to ignore. I'm not asking you to choose between your work and me. I'm asking you to let me be a part of your life, the way I've always wanted to be. Jack looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just the woman who had captivated him years ago, but the woman who had stood by him through the toughest moments of his journey. She had believed in him when others hadn't, challenged him when he needed it, and now she was offering him something he hadn't allowed himself to hope for. You're right, he said finally, his voice steady but filled with emotion. I've spent so much time building this empire, proving myself to everyone else, that I forgot to build something for myself, for us. Emily's lips curved into a small, hopeful smile. Then let's build it together. Not just the company, but everything else. The future, Jack, our future. Jack reached out, his hand finding hers, their fingers intertwining. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace, of completeness. The weight of his ambitions, the pressure to prove himself, it all seemed to fade in the face of what Emily was offering him. Together, he agreed, his voice firm. But Emily, this isn't going to be easy. We're both strong-willed, and we've got a lot of work ahead of us. There will be challenges, disagreements. And we'll face them together, Emily interrupted, her tone resolute. Just like we've faced everything else. I'm not afraid of the challenges, Jack. I'm afraid of losing what we could have because we were too stubborn to try. Jack chuckled softly, the sound warm and genuine. You always did know how to cut right to the heart of things. Emily smiled, her eyes sparkling with a mix of relief and joy. It's one of my many talents. The tension between them dissolved, replaced by a sense of possibility, of hope. Jack felt a weight lift from his shoulders, one he hadn't even realized he was carrying. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a future that wasn't just about work, about proving himself, but about something more, something real. "All right," he said, squeezing her hand. "Together. But Emily, I need you to know something. This isn't just about the company or the merger or even the past. This is about us, about what we could be, and I'm all in." Emily's smile widened, and she stepped closer, her free hand resting on his chest. "I'm all in too, Jack. Always. Have been." The moment hung between them, charged with unspoken promises and the weight of everything they had been through. And then, slowly, Jack leaned in, his lips brushing against hers, in a kiss that was both tender and filled with the promise of everything to come. When they finally pulled apart, Emily rested her forehead against his, her breath warm against his skin. "We've got a lot to figure out," she murmured. "We do," Jack agreed, his voice steady, "but we'll figure it out together, one step at a time." Emily nodded, her smile softening. One step at a time. The months that followed were a whirlwind of activity. The merger between Miller Agritech and Thompson Processing was finalized, creating one of the most powerful agricultural companies in the country. Jack and Emily worked side by side, their partnership in business mirroring their growing relationship outside of it. Richard Thompson, though initially resistant, gradually came to accept the new reality. He remained on the board, offering his experience and insight, but it was clear that the future of the company and his family's legacy was in Jack and Emily's hands. The announcement of their relationship came as a surprise to many, but those who knew them well saw it as the natural next step. They were a team in every sense of the word, and their combined vision and determination propelled the company to new heights. One evening, as they stood on the balcony of Jack's new home, overlooking the sprawling fields that had once been his family's modest farm, Emily turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" she asked, her voice soft. Jack smiled, his arm around her shoulders. "Every day. But it's not just about how far we've come, Emily. It's about where we're going." Emily leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. "And where are we going, Jack?" He looked out over the fields, the golden light of the setting sun casting a warm glow over the land. "We're going to change the world, Emily. Not just with the company, but with everything we do together." Emily smiled, her heart full. Together. And as they stood there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Jack knew that he had finally found what he had been searching for all along. Not just success, not just recognition, but something far more important: love, partnership, and the promise of a future built on trust, respect, and shared dreams. The journey had been long, and the road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges. But with Emily by his side, Jack felt ready to face whatever came their way. Together they would build not just a company but a life, a legacy that would endure for generations to come. The months that followed were a testament to the strength of their partnership, both in business and in life. Jack and Emily became inseparable, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. The Miller-Thompson Group flourished under their joint leadership, becoming a beacon of innovation and sustainability in the agricultural industry. Their success was not just measured in profits, but in the positive impact they had on communities, farmers, and the environment. One crisp autumn morning, as the leaves turned golden and the air carried the promise of change, Jack and Emily stood together at the edge of the original Miller farm. The land, once a modest family plot, now stretched as far as the eye could see, a testament to their shared vision and hard work. "Do you remember when this was just 50 acres?" Emily asked, her voice tinged with nostalgia as she looked out. "Over the fields." Jack chuckled, his arm wrapped around her shoulders. "I do, it feels like a lifetime ago. Back then I could barely imagine what we've built together." Emily turned to him, her eyes shining with pride. "You've come so far, Jack. From a young farmer with big dreams to the leader of one of the most influential companies in the world. I'm so proud of you." Jack shook his head, his expression softening. "We've come so far, Emily. None of this would have been possible without you. You believed in me when no one else did. You stood by me, challenged me and pushed me to be better. This is our legacy, not just mine. Emily smiled, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. It's ours, and I wouldn't want to share it with anyone else. As they stood there, the sun casting a warm glow over the fields, Jack felt a sense of contentment he had never known before. The dreams he had once held so tightly, of proving himself, of building something extraordinary, had been realized. But it was the love and partnership he had found with Emily that truly fulfilled him. "Emily," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "there's something I've been wanting to ask you." She turned to him, her brow furrowing slightly, in curiosity. "What is it?" Jack took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. As he opened it, the sunlight caught the diamond ring inside, making it sparkle brilliantly. "Emily Thompson," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "you've been my partner in every sense of the word. You've stood by me through the toughest times and celebrated with me in the best. I can't imagine my life without you. Will you marry me?" Emily's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the ring, then back at Jack. For a moment she was speechless, overwhelmed by the depth of her emotions. Then, with a radiant smile, she nodded. "Yes, Jack, yes, I'll marry you." Jack's face broke into a wide grin as he slipped the ring onto her finger. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as they both laughed and cried, the joy of the moment overwhelming them. The news of their engagement spread quickly, bringing joy to everyone who knew them. The Miller and Thompson families, once divided by pride and prejudice, came together to celebrate the union of their children. Richard Thompson, though initially hesitant, found himself genuinely happy for his daughter, and the man who had not only saved his company, but had also won his respect. The wedding was held on the original Miller farm, now transformed into a stunning venue that blended rustic charm with modern elegance. The fields that had once been the backdrop of Jack's childhood dreams now served as the setting for the beginning of a new chapter in his life. As Jack stood at the altar, waiting for Emily to walk down the aisle, he felt a profound sense of gratitude. The journey had been long and filled with challenges, but it had led him here, to this moment, to this woman, to this life. When Emily appeared, her beauty took his breath away. She wore a simple yet elegant gown that reflected her grace and strength, and as she walked toward him, Jack felt his heart swell with love and pride. The ceremony was a celebration of their love, their partnership, and the future they would build together. As they exchanged vows, promising to support and cherish each other for the rest of their lives, Jack knew that he had found his true purpose, not just in his work, but in the love he shared with Emily. The reception was a joyous affair filled with laughter, music, and dancing. Friends and family from both sides came together, their differences set aside in celebration of the couple's happiness. Even Richard Thompson, who had once looked down on Jack, raised a toast to the man who had not only proven himself, but had also become a part of his family. "To Jack and Emily," Richard said, his voice filled with emotion, "may your love and partnership continue to inspire us all. You've shown us that with vision, determination, and love, anything is possible." As the night wore on, Jack and Emily found a quiet moment to themselves, stepping outside to look at the stars. The field stretched out before them, a symbol of everything they had built and everything they would continue to build together. "Jack," Emily said softly, her hand resting on his arm, "do you ever think about how far we've come?" He smiled, pulling her closer. "Every day. But what I think about most is how lucky I am to have you by my side. You've made all of this possible. Emily, not just the company, but the life we're building together." Emily leaned her head against his shoulder, her heart full. "We've come so far, but this is just the beginning, Jack. I can't wait to see what the future holds for us." Jack kissed the top of her head, his heart swelling with love and gratitude. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together, just like we always have." As they stood there under the vast Indiana sky, Jack knew that he had finally found what he had been searching for all along. Not just success, not just recognition, but something far more important: love, partnership, and the promise of a future built on trust, respect, and shared dreams. The journey had been long, and the road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges. But with Emily by his side, Jack felt ready to face whatever came their way. Together they would build not just a company, but a life, a legacy that would endure for generations to come.